Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 7 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay or Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
I will not mince words. This is the required read for anybody inside the Beltway this morning. It is a book from a time ago. Paul, you walked around because you were cool. Because Douglas Irwin had a book with a sailboat on the cover. It was a light blue book. It was Against the Tide, and it was absolutely definitive. I read every word of it, and we're thrilled that Professor Irwin could join us from Dartmouth today. Let me just get out of the way. Doug Irwin, a cup of coffee with the president this morning as he prepares his State of the Union. What would be your counsel to President Trump?
I don't think he'd want to hear anything I'd have to say. I'd say the Supreme Court did him a favor by trying to put these tariffs on pause. But of course, the president has just reimposed the similar tariffs using different authority. So it was a very important decision. It was a very historic one, but it just shunted the president to using different statutory authorities to levy tariffs. And he's going to move forward with them.
Will we see a legal battle of these new tariffs? Claudia Sahm, it's away from her remit, which is monetary economics. But Professor Irwin, do you just assume further legal battles about 10% or 15%, 120 whatever, 230 this?
Yeah, a lot of numbers being thrown around in terms of the statutes. Yeah, so the new tariffs, which are 10%, he's promised 15%, but they haven't issued the executive order on that quite yet. Those will probably be subject to legal challenge. And that's because the statute allows for the president to impose tariffs in the cases of a balance of payments deficit or disequilibrium. And it's not clear that in an era of floating exchange rates, whether such a thing exists anymore. Now, the other side is that the tariffs can only be in effect for 150 days and then require congressional approval. So there's a lot of uncertainty about how this is going to play out over the next couple months.
Professor, I guess most of our viewing and listening audience, what they know about tariffs, they've learned over the last, 6, 7, 8 years, which is just massive tariffs on all types of countries, all types of products across the board. But typically, how are tariffs historically used and how can they be most useful? Well,
that's really why this administration marks such a sharp break from what we've seen in terms of historical experience. You've probably mentioned Smoot-Hawley on the air over the past couple of years. Before that, and actually Smoot-Hawley itself, Congress determined tariffs. It's part of the legislative power of tax. It's in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And it was basically Congress's decision what to do. Then powers began being delegated to the president, and we entered the era after World War II of the president negotiating trade agreements to reduce tariffs. And the tariffs have been sort of on a one-way path down since World War II, and that's when enter Trump, and also that same authority starts being used to increase tariffs, once again, across different products, across different countries, in all manner of way.
Worldwide and across the nation this morning, Douglas Irwin of Dartmouth College. He is our definitive expert on trade. Only standing with him is Barry Eichengreen of Berkeley. We'll get Professor Eichengreen on in a bit, out with his new book. Paul Sweeney with Professor Irwin.
Professor, we had the New York Fed come out with a report, I guess a week or so ago, that said, 90%-ish of the tariffs have been borne by the American economy, either importers, companies, and even consumers. Obviously, the White House pushing back on that. Who pays really at the end of the day for tariffs?
Well, the importer in the U.S. actually writes the check, but then they pass it on to whoever they're selling the products to, and it sort of goes along the value chain. That Federal Reserve, that Fed study, it's been sort of replicated, that finding that 90% of the tariffs get passed through to domestic purchasers, either final consumers or businesses along the way. That's been confirmed by at least half a dozen other studies. So study after study has sort of consistently shown that, both for the Trump first-term tariffs as well as these most recent ones.
Madeline Marshall has a fabulous video out at the Wall Street Journal. I put it out about a week ago, folks. I'll redo that with the academic input of Douglas Irwin. Doug, your 3 R's of trade policy: revenue, restriction, reciprocity. We're not going to do a quiz at the end of the interview, but Professor Irwin, they're very chronological. And what I find interesting is the restriction, using high tariffs to restrict the imports of McKinley in post-Civil War America. I mean, they were all shown the door in the voting. In 1890, the Republicans, including McKinley, basically lost their jobs. Do you anticipate that in November, a McKinley 1890 kind of vote by America?
Well, that's a very interesting historical observation. And you're right, it does have some resonance for today. So I mentioned the new statutory authority that the president's levied these tariffs. After 150 days, he might have to ask Congress to re-up those tariffs. Does Congress want to vote for higher tariffs in the summer before midterm elections when Republicans are already divided over trade policy? I don't think so. So it leads into the affordability agenda and prices. And so I think tariffs could be toxic come this fall.
What should China do? There's a lot in the press today about how China responds. I guess the president's going to, maybe Doug Irwin's going to carry the president's luggage to China.
Could do that.
Yeah, I could see it. He could stay in Hong Kong, in Shanghai rather, at the Peace Hotel where Henry Kissinger stayed. I mean, he could do that. Professor Irwin, if you were to go to China with the president, how do you discuss this with Beijing and how do they respond?
Well, I think what Beijing is looking for is stability in the bilateral relationship. And that's exactly what we don't have at the moment. Now, we do have special tariffs on China under a different provision of trade law, and those can be subject to negotiation. But we're sort of in this uneasy truce with Beijing about they're not going to restrict rare earths and we're not going to impose further tariffs. How we move out of that remains to be seen. And it really depends on what the administration has in mind. And then Beijing, I think, is holding its cards close to its chest and probably won't do much until it sees what the administration wants.
Professor, one of the results of the Supreme Court decision last week is maybe some companies, some individuals may want to get some rebates of the tariffs that they've incurred. And just today, FedEx sues the United States to get full refund of emergency tariffs after Supreme Court ruling. Do we have any idea how that process would work?
We have no idea at the moment. So the administration has promised that there will be rebates, but they could be slow walked. And that's why I think we'll see lawsuits to try to accelerate the process. It could take months or even years. It doesn't necessarily have to take that long, but it's clear the administration is reluctant to give up that revenue. And no process has been identified, at least as far as I know, about what the process will be to adjudicate all those claims for the revenue that is amounting to tens of billions of dollars to going back to American businesses that imported foreign goods.
Come on, Blanchflower's going to say, Doug Irwin, David Blanchflower up at Dartmouth, just print more debt. I mean, do we need that revenue? I haven't seen a clear case that we must have the revenue, the first of your 3 R's.
Well, you're right that the Trump administration has used all three of those R's, and revenue has been an important one. And they certainly made the case for the tariffs on the revenue grounds, but they're legally obligated, I think, to turn it back. But the question is, it's not a matter of does the government have the money, but can they go back through the records and isolate those firms that actually paid the tariffs in the first place.
The continuum of you're against the tide. Folks, I can't emphasize enough. It was like Daniel Yergin's A Prize. Even if you didn't read it, you walked around with it because it was cool. You had to be cool. So you had Doug Irwin's Against the Tides. The absolute foundation of your book is Robert Solow, Technology. Technology comes to the rescue as America expands in that. Do you just assume our international trade tensions, Doug Irwin, will get fixed by further technology leadership in America?
I think the two are interrelated. I think that the U.S. leadership in technology and other matters gets disrupted with all these trade frictions across countries and the tariffs that are going up and down and can change on a whim. So, trade disrupts that process of spreading technology around the world. It inhibits our ability to export to other countries because there's implicit retaliation against the U.S., and it disrupts all the business relationships that are needed to provide the funds for more R&D. So it's not good for our technological development. But at the same time, technology does march to its own drummer to some extent and will continue to move forward, regardless of what is happening on the trade front.
Professor, is it reasonable to assume that this Supreme Court decision may embolden Congress to try to reassert some of its authority over tariff policy?
Well, it certainly was a wake-up call, and some of the justices really did call out Congress, not so many words, saying, you have to step up. It's really your responsibility under the Constitution to adjudicate and oversee trade policy. The question is whether they'll do it. Under this administration, I think Congress would act with great trepidation in trying to pull back some of the powers it's delegated to the president. But I think there is a medium-term agenda for future Congresses and future administrations to try to rethink U.S. trade law and ensure that we don't go through the mess and the muddle that we've gone through over the past year.
Professor, is the concept of free trade, is that still relevant in today's global economy?
I think it always remains relevant to some extent. Now, free trade doesn't mean absolutely no barriers and no interventions whatsoever. But I think we do have to distinguish, and former Vice President Mike Pence has sort of made this clear, that between, what he's called for is free trade with free nations. And we have to think about trade as part of our alliance system, as a way of working with allies, and then separating out those countries that are adversaries. And we don't want to treat them the same in terms of our trade policy, because that's an extension of our foreign policy.
Well, that's a really good point here. We're going to have to leave here in a bit, Professor Irwin, but off of your wonderful article, and essay, I should say, in The Economist here in the last couple days, can you explain why we're going after Canada and not China? I mean, I know that I still call him Governor Carney from the Bank of England. Mark Carney, good morning, and everyone up in Ottawa. Doug Irwin, why are we going after Canada when we have true adversaries that we're trading with?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, I'm giving a talk in Canada in about 2 weeks, so I'm going to have to think this through for our Canadian friends up north.
Be careful, you may lose your teeth.
Right. That's right. Yes, high sticking. I'll have to talk to the Dartmouth hockey team about how they prevent such things from happening. But I don't know whether it's a personal relationship that Donald Trump didn't forage with Justin Trudeau, whether there's some real estate deals that went bad in the past, whether there's some other aggrieved parties within the administration that's speaking to the president ill of Canada. But I agree with you in some sense. It just doesn't make sense that here we've had peaceful, cooperative relations with this great neighbor to the north of us for so many decades, and yet we're jeopardizing that with these trade wars.
One final question. I mentioned Davenport, Iowa, the first district of Iowa, where the Congresswoman is fighting for her life. What is your counsel to Republican House of Representative types on the precipice of losing their seats? What should they do on trade?
Well, I think they really have to speak to their constituents about how, in certain ways, they differ from the president. Once again, in the Midwest farm states, they've been hammered with foreign retaliation against our agricultural exports. So American farmers are really suffering. And so they have to offer some sort of promise that there's a better days ahead in terms of the ability of the U.S. farmers to export to other countries. And we're just not seeing it under this administration. Where
in God's name is the update to Against the Tide?
Yeah, exactly.
Are you slacking off, Doug Irwin? When do we get the next 3 chapters of Against the Tide?
I'm not sure, but I've got another book called Free Trade Under Fire. And if there's any time free trade's been under fire, that one's due for a revision.
Very good. Douglas Irwin, thank you so much. Just wonderful, generous of your time this morning. He is at Dartmouth. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Surveillance coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
This is a really good time to talk to Cam Dawson. I'm just going to cut to the chase. You're on the cover of Barron's this weekend. They give you lots of play as they deservedly, as you deserve, and they should. And the question is simply going to be there. Is this the opportunity of a lifetime to reset in a beleaguered Mag 7?
Well, I think that a lot of people have been considering it that, because if you look at the flows into the software ETF, they've been a record,
Really?
meaning that the dip buyers have been out in force. And I think that a lot of people are trying to catch that proverbial falling knife. I think the question is have you seen enough damage to some of these what were powerful uptrends to start forming into what could be more distributional kinds of patterns? And I think at this point, we wouldn't be stepping into some of the areas like a software necessarily. I think the one key thing is that a lot of these areas have been a monolith on the way down. We don't think that there'll be a monolith on the way up. And this is where we're starting to sharpen our pencils to say, who are those who will truly be disrupted and who are those who could actually benefit from this AI?
S&P equal weighted up 5-6%. S&P SPX actually flat for the year. We rarely see that, I guess. So that broadening out trade seems to be a thing so far.
I think the way we would frame it is that this market has not been risk off, it's been risk swap. Okay. Effectively, we are swapping out of the areas of the market that we think are AI disrupted into areas that either benefit from the AI infrastructure or those that cannot be disrupted. We heard a really great new acronym called HALO from the Saxo podcast. It stands for High Asset, Low Obsolescence. Oh. So people are crowding into areas of the market that they think cannot be disrupted by AI. The challenge is those areas are higher asset intensity and lower return on invested capital.
Cameron Dawson with us here, right, in the equity markets. While Paul's talking, I'm using the Bloomberg to really look at the charts and the technology. We'll get to that in a moment. But the drawdown on NASDAQ futures, Paul, back to November is all of 7%.
Yeah.
I would have thought it was 15 or 20%.
I know, exactly. Cam, we're pretty much through most of the earnings so far here this cycle. Pretty darn solid, I think. How do you view earnings, and what does the market need to see from this earnings going forward?
What's fascinating is that, yes, the earnings have been strong. You've been revising up estimates for 4Q. They're coming in at 13% versus the expected 8% at the start of the quarter. If you look at 2026 numbers, those have been revised higher. You're actually even revising higher 2027 numbers, if you can even believe. So people are expecting 13% growth this year, 13% growth next year. But all of the pain has been coming from the multiple, from the valuation, because it does appear like this market is not as eager to extrapolate today's earnings power ever into the future.
Satya Nadella again out tweeting for Microsoft today. He's in London on regulatory, and that'll be their response to these real sensitivities of AI. Over at Mike Allen over at Axios, really writing up the tension in the State of the Union speech in Washington about artificial intelligence. Can I go tech with Cam?
Sure.
Nerd, let's get practice. You're going to be in Phoenix with me next week, right?
Yes, sir.
All Nerd Fest in Phoenix with the CFA Society, Cam Dawson and Tom Keene. Okay, the price of Microsoft is back to early 2024. I don't have a sell signal on weekly Kleinman exponential moving averages. I don't have a violation of 2 monthly units of parabolic SAR. What this means is the trend's in place, but we really haven't broken down. I mean, that's simple.
Well, I think that is the key point, which is that right now, within the broader software index, we are sitting at exactly the 200-week moving average, not 200-day, 200-week moving average. This has been such powerful support ever since the lows coming out of the great financial crisis. Anytime there has been a whoopsie in markets, we've gotten to that 200-week moving average. The question is, does it hold this time?
Alexis Christopher says, Tom, lose a technical mumbo jumbo. The tip there, folks, from the pro Cam Dawson is the big mistake is to only look at daily charts. The pros look weekly. Paul Sweeney.
So, Cam, what's screening well for you these days? Is it an industry? Is it a factor? What's screening well? Well,
for the last year or so, my colleague Brian Nick coined the term, we have to shore up the 60 in equity market portfolios. And what that means is that we didn't want to be over-concentrated in one factor, over-concentrated in one style. So if you rode the growth wave up and you were way overweight growth, it was a great opportunity to add some more value into portfolios, being a bit more balanced there. Add international into portfolios. Remember, the international weight in the global index, so that ACWI index, is about 30%, which meant that most of our clients were by definition underweight international. So there was room to move those allocations higher. So all that means is that diversification is now a really good friend over the course of effectively the last 18 months.
Quickly, do you think the tech companies will finally grow up and issue normal debt? Are they just going to go out like Google did and billions of dollars of debt?
I mean, I thought that there was a really interesting note in the FT from Moody's today talking about effectively how a lot of the tech companies are using some accounting gimmicks.
I read every word of it.
I mean, and being able to not have things be on the balance sheet, that's typically what we see in late cycles. Let's obfuscate some of the cash flows in order to make things look better. You do not play tricks with cash if everything is awesome.
Thank you so much. And I'll go into detail, folks, on the wonderful work the FT did in the last 24 hours on this. Cameron Dawson, NewEdge Wealth Management. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Surveillance coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Joining us now from Washington, the voice I want to speak to. I went to the State of the Union once, folks, and basically it's a lot of meat and glad head and all that. But underneath is substance. Nathan Dean, Senior US Policy Analyst, Bloomberg Intelligence. What's the substance tonight, Nathan?
So I think there's three themes that we're telling our clients to watch out for. The first is geopolitics. And the reason why this is so important is for everything else President Trump says tonight, there's a process. We can work the process and there's time to respond. But for geopolitics, that can change in an instant. So obviously keep an eye on what he says there. The other is tariffs. He's going to double down on tariffs. I don't think you're going to see any new information coming out from tariffs, but he's going to double down and he's going to have to look the Supreme Court in the eye and say, why did you essentially reverse my IEEPA tariffs? But when it comes to affordability, we're seeing a lot of headline risks and opportunities. We don't anticipate a lot of new ideas. Potentially, President Trump's talking about this idea of a new 401k for, Americans that don't have employer-sponsored programs. But the thing about headline risk is that for anything that comes that President Trump says, like cutting credit card interest rate caps, interest at 10%, requires an act of legislation. It's going to be very difficult to get through in an election year.
I have been saying, folks, really off the mic, to be honest, where is the military in the discussion of Iran? And there it is, Nathan Dean, those photographs on the cover of the Washington Post, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the reporting is they're saying slow down. Into this State of the Union tonight, how will the president address the military in preparations in the Middle East?
So it really comes down to the fact that, are we going to see what Bloomberg News is reporting of this limited strike, or are we going to see negotiations take place on Thursday? I mean, that's really, I think, the signal that we're looking for. We're seeing a lot of what Bloomberg Economics is putting out on the subject, and they've just been saying that, like, look, we've got a significant number of assets in the region, and they can't stay there forever. So, we're going to look for words that essentially says, are we going to offer the olive branch, or are we going to try and drive this, more of a force, if you will, to bring people to the table. But again, this idea of limited strike is really what's the idea that's floating around Washington at the moment.
Nathan, it is an election year. How typically do presidents use this State of the Union address during an election year, particularly when President Trump's approval ratings are lower? The Republicans in the ranks are a little bit concerned about some of those trends.
Great question. State of the Unions during election years are always campaign speeches, and that's what people should be thinking of when they watch tonight. President Trump isn't going to move to the middle. He's going to try and drive a little bit deeper in terms of bringing back, optimism, if you will, amongst the Republican Party. Because if you look at the prediction markets, the odds are favoring that the Democrats are going to take the House, and they have a little bit stronger opportunity of taking the Senate. So I think you're going to see President Trump come back to Republican ideas to try and drive optimism amongst the party. You're not going to see Democrats really, stand up and clap for the president all that much. It's going to be very much a partisan speech, and that's something that we should take in mind when he says statements like, I want to do this. Can you get that through an election year? In a lot of cases, presidents can't do that.
Is there pushback, or I guess the question is, what level of pushback is there in D.C. amongst the folks down there about this whole tariff policy? It doesn't seem to be polling particularly well, yet the president is very adamant about doubling down, tripling down.
So it's not really there's much pushback in the way of just there's uneasiness. And the way that the Republicans are approaching this is they're essentially saying, look, I just would prefer to talk about something else, because even though you have the Republicans who are signaling that they're uneasy about tariffs, they're not going to push back on the president, certainly during an election year when they need his support in the primary season. So, maybe after the primary season, think May, you could see additional pushback. But right now, the Republicans are just going to say hands off. And that's one of the reasons why I don't think a reconciliation bill can get forward. So when you hear senators say, I want to codify President Trump's tariffs, it's just probably not going to happen.
Nathan, you are more qualified than anyone at Bloomberg to talk about this. When you go north from Harry's Chocolate Shop at Purdue, boiler up, Nathan Dean, and you go up and you go across the width of Illinois, and all of a sudden there's a river and there's Davenport. The president has to speak tonight to Marinette Miller Meeks, of the 1st District in Iowa. She's fighting for her life. What does President Trump have to say to Congresswoman Miller Meeks of Davenport?
It has to be about affordability and affordability and affordability. And this is one of the problems for the Republican Party at the moment, because you're going to hear President Trump talk about significant number of ways to cut down costs for consumer goods. But in the same breath, he's embracing tariffs, which we would argue has an inflationary impact as well. And so this is really a muddled message. But President Trump has to essentially tell the American people that he understands that costs are going up. And when his message is essentially said, we're bringing costs down and inflation is down, it's a difficult message for a lot of people to gather.
Nathan, we have to go because I have to save time at the end of this block to point out that Purdue is number 8 ranked in the nation and Duke is ranked number 1. So we got to move on to get to that March Madness. Nathan Dean in charge of our Boiler Up operation in Washington and, of course, all of our policy. Just wonderful to speak to him on this. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Surveillance coming up after this.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Or watch us live on YouTube.
This is going to be another interview of a spectacular foreign affairs article. But things have changed in the last 24 hours. On the front of the Washington Post, on the front of the New York Times, a still photograph of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff looking lonely, separate, and apart. The reporting by different media is simple. The military pushing back against Oval Office thoughts of Iran. Nadia Schadlow joins us now. A spectacular foreign affairs issue. Kishore Mahbubani, among others, a great article on Germany. Professor Schadlow writing, Why America Must Build a New Operating System. How alone is the president, Nadia, looking at a new operating system as he looks to Tehran? The military seems to be saying, slow down.
Well, he's not alone overall in that my article essentially was an argument about how the global approach to problem sets has not worked and has not solved problems. And in a sense, Iran is a good example of that, in that for some 47 years, we've seen the Iranian regime grow in strength, create regional chaos, kill thousands upon thousands of its own people, and grow its nuclear program, right? Most importantly for the United States and for Israel, to threaten Israel, our allies in the region, and potentially the United States, that the Iranian regime has called the Great Satan for many, many years. So it's actually a good example of how global institutions writ large have not been that successful by their own measure in solving some of these key problems. These are difficult problems. You're not going to necessarily solve all of them, but even in managing them. Right. The president is now in a position where he sees that this may be the best chance ever of finally degrading the Iranian nuclear program, right? For years and years, for decades, other approaches have not worked. Iran is at its weakest in many, many years, largely also because of the June strikes, Operation Midnight Hammer. But, now he's considering a course of action, which he thinks will put the United States, Israel, and our allies in a better position. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs is right to point out the risks of military action. There are always risks of military action. It certainly would not be easy. In U.S. history, all of the wars that we've been involved with have had to deal with the political ramifications of war, the need to stabilize a country, the need to create better political outcomes than when you went in. So it's not going to be easy if the president chooses to go in.
Nadia, again, the president and the U.S. has assembled quite the armada in that part of the world. We have 2 carrier strike groups there. It's a show of force that we've not seen there in a very, very long time. What do you think the view is of the Iranians here when they look at that, the amount of the force that's been assembled?
I think the Iranian regime says, gee, President Trump is serious, right? They see the potential for destruction, great destruction in their country. I think they're taking it seriously. And I think the president did the right thing by assembling this huge strength of military force, the largest in the region since 2003. Since 2003. So I think it's the right course. You want to show off your military power to deter, to potentially get the Iranians to come to an agreement. So far, they haven't come to an agreement. In some ways, it's in their hands, right? I mean, the president clearly wants a negotiated settlement. He wants a settlement that will get rid of Iran's nuclear program, degrade its ballistic missiles, all of those things he said.
What is the distinction, folks? Nadia Schadlow with us from the Hudson Institute, senior fellow, with a brilliant article in Foreign Affairs. What is the distinction, Nadia, between the globalist delusion of Nadia Schadlow and Ian Bremmer's Every Nation for Itself?
I'm not arguing. I need to read Ian's article. But I'm not. I mean, maybe we're not. My argument points out that by its own measures, the United Nations, for instance, and other global institutions have not achieved what they said they have wanted to achieve. Climate is a perfect example. For 25, 30 years, climate has been a key focus of this global groupthink movement, and yet the numbers aren't there. So maybe we need to try something new. I'm arguing that power resides in states. It's a state-centric system, but that's a good thing. It's okay. That's the way the world works. And if you acknowledge that as a starting point, maybe you'll get to better outcomes. I think others who argue against a state-centric approach see it as sort of a Hobbesian world of everyone fighting against each other. I'm not arguing that. I just argue that if you acknowledge that states have power, are the source of power, and you begin from that, you create a way of doing things that might lead you to a better place. I'm arguing for cooperation. You need cooperation, but not necessarily through these hugely bureaucratic institutions. Work with other like-minded countries. And I argue that it's really important for democracies because we're seeing over and over again the difficulty of actually getting things done. We see this domestically too, and it hurts democracies. It hurts confidence in the American system. People want to see that the promises are kept and that outcomes are achieved. So I'm arguing for a different operating system, meaning a different approach to solving problems and to going more to a level where you're approaching things from coalitions of the willing, smaller scale, beginning at the local and working your way up, not beginning from, in New York, I think we're all near New York, not from New York top down, United Nations top down, and solving that way.
So Nadia, again, just to follow up on that point, what is the role of the United Nations, of NATO? How should the U.S., I guess, operate within that framework, or is it America first?
Well, NATO is really different. NATO is a perfect example of the exact type of multilateral institution of states cooperating. We're cooperating because we basically agree on the problem sets. We have similar political systems. We're all democracies, almost roughly. NATO is created for a particular reason, and it's a military alliance that has worked, that has developed real defense capabilities that we should not throw out. It's really hard to operate with allies and partners on the ground in a military way. So NATO is a great example of an institution we should work with and through. The United Nations is a huge sprawling set of agencies and organizations that really is far removed from state control fundamentally. States fund fund it, but it's far removed from democracies and from actually being close to what you might vote for as a citizen and then get through the United Nations.
Nadia, we've got to get you back on, coming out of the Cornell Soviet Studies Combine, which is world class. We got to get you back on to get an update on Vladimir Putin. I just really can't say enough about what they've done at Ithaca on Soviet studies over many, many decades. Nadia Schadlow in Foreign Affairs Magazine. The issue's really something.
This is the Bloomberg Surveillance Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday, 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.